Hi guys. Tonight, we take a long step back into the dark. We are turning our minds away from the modern world, away from the hum of electricity and the rush of everyday hours, to look into a time before time itself had a name. We are embarking on a journey through the complete arc of Norse mythology, a vast, bittersweet tapestry that stretches from the silent, freezing dawn of the cosmos all the way to its fiery, inevitable end. This is a story of ice and fire, of grand halls and deep roots, of gods who were powerful but never immortal. Over the course of our time together, we will watch the universe form from a quiet void. We will walk beside the All-Father, Odin, as he seeks wisdom at the highest costs. We will hear the thunder of Thor's hammer across stormy skies, witness the clever, tragic mischief of Loki, and ultimately face the twilight of Ragnarok, where the world must die so that it can be born anew. But every great ending belongs to a beginning. To understand the gods, we must first understand the silence that came before them. So, let your mind settle. Let the room grow still around you, and let us travel back to a time when there was absolutely nothing. The void of Ginnungagap. Before there was an earth to stand upon, before there was a sky to hold the stars, there was only Ginnungagap. The old poet spoke of Ginnungagap as a vast, yawning abyss. It was not merely an empty space, but a profound, heavy nothingness. It was a silence so deep that it would have swallowed the sound of a heartbeat. There was no wind, for there was no air to move. There was no light, for no sun had yet been kindled. There was no time, because there was nothing changing, nothing aging, nothing dying. It was a void of pure potential, a canvas of absolute stillness sleeping in the dark. Imagine standing on the edge of that endless chasm. If you were to look down, or up, or to the sides, your eyes would find nothing to rest upon. It was a twilight without a day, a shadow without a shape. Yet, this void was not dead. It was waiting. It was a womb of unformed reality, holding its breath for an eternity, suspended in a quiet patience that we can scarcely comprehend today. The two realms, fire and ice. For age upon age, Ginnungagap remained unbroken. But eventually, at the far reaches of this nothingness, two ancient, primordial forces began to bleed into existence. They did not form worlds with trees and rivers, but rather pure, elemental realms at opposite ends of the void. To the far south, there grew a place of unbearable heat and light. This was Muspelheim. It was a realm of glowing embers, of liquid rock, and of fierce, unbridled flame. Muspelheim was so bright and so hot that no one could endure it unless they were native to its fires. It hissed and bubbled in the dark, throwing violent sparks up into the southern edges of Ginnungagap. At the border of this burning land sat Surt, an ancient being of fire, holding a flaming sword, waiting for the end of days. But in the beginning, he simply watched the embers drift into the emptiness. To the far north, the absolute opposite took shape. This was Niflheim, a realm of bitter, biting cold and eternal mist. If Muspelheim was the breath of fire, Niflheim was the frozen sigh of death. At the heart of Niflheim bubbled a great, dark spring called Hvergelmir, the bubbling cauldron. From this spring poured 11 ancient rivers, collectively known as the Olivigar. These rivers flowed away from the spring, journeying out into the northern expanses of Ginnungagap. But as the waters traveled further from their source, moving deeper into the freezing void, the intense cold of the north began to take hold of them. The rushing waters slowed. They thickened. The spray turned to frost, and the waves hardened into massive, heavy glaciers. Over thousands of years, these rivers froze solid, stacking layer upon layer of blue ice and rime into the northern half of the void. A heavy, frozen fog settled over the glaciers, sealing them in a perpetual, freezing gloom. The meeting in the mist. Now, Ginnungagap was no longer just a void. It was a battlefield of two opposing natures. In the north, the heavy, silent weight of the ice. In the south, the flickering, restless energy of the fire. And in the middle, the great empty space where they would inevitably meet. Slowly, imperceptibly, the warmth of Muspelheim drifted northward, carried by an unseen, cosmic breath. At the same time, the freezing rime of Niflheim crept southward. In the dead center of Ginnungagap, where the air was mild and still, the heat met the frost. What happened next was the turning point of creation. When the warm air touched the ancient ice, the ice did not simply melt into water, it began to thaw with a strange, magical quickening. The venomous, potent waters of the Olivigar rivers, which had been locked in the ice for eons, began to drip. 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 In the quiet of the void, the sound of those falling drops must have been like thunder. Each drop held the essence of life, animated by the heat of fire and given substance by the density of ice. As the waters melted and pooled in the center of Ginnungagap, the drops began to take form. They gathered together, shifting and growing, molded by the cosmic forces, until a shape emerged from the fog. The birth of Ymir. From the thawing rime, the first living being was born. His name was Ymir. Ymir was not a god, nor was he a man. He was a giant, a being of such colossal size that the mind bends trying to imagine his stature. The whisper of the three brothers in the deep dark of Ginnungagap grew louder, turning from a quiet thought into an unyielding purpose. Odin, Vili, and Ve stood together at the center of existence, watching the colossal form of Ymir. The first giant lay spread across the void, heavy and slow, a mountain of flesh and ice that breathed with a rhythmic, thunderous sigh. Around him, the universe was stagnant. It was a place of endless drifting mists, of bitter rime that never melted, and of wild, chaotic energies that had no direction, no meaning, and no shore. To the brothers, this state of things was no longer tolerable. They possessed minds that craved symmetry, eyes that wished to gaze upon horizons, and hands that burned with the desire to shape, to build, and to govern. They understood that creation could not truly begin while the primordial chaos of Ymir filled the world. To make room for something beautiful, the old order had to be shattered. The decision was not made out of malice, but out of a cosmic necessity that the brothers felt in the very marrow of their bones. They approached the sleeping giant, their movements silent against the backdrop of the crackling fires of Muspelheim and the groaning ice of Niflheim. When the moment came, the three brothers struck together. The battle was a cataclysmic event, a collision of divine will against elemental mass that shook the foundations of the yawning abyss. Ymir, with all his vastness and brute strength, could not withstand the sharp, focused intellect and unified power of Bor's sons. The giant fell, his mountainous frame collapsing into the void, and as his breath left him, an unimaginable torrent of blood surged from his wounds. This blood was not like the blood of mortal men, it was a vast, rushing ocean of dark, venomous water, a roaring flood that poured out from his body with such sudden and immense force that it threatened to drown everything in existence. The deluge swept through the valleys of Ginnungagap, rising higher and higher until it washed over the strongholds of the frost giants. The children of Ymir, born from his sweat in the ancient mists, were caught in the freezing tide. They scrambled across the slippery glaciers, but the torrent was too swift, too deep, and too cold. One by one, the ancient giants were swept away into the dark, swallowed by the very life force of their progenitor. Only two survived. A giant named Bergelmir and his wife managed to climb aboard a hollowed-out tree trunk, using it as a fragile boat to ride the crests of the bloody waves. They drifted away into the remote, freezing fringes of the cosmos, into the outer mists that would later become Jotunheim, the land of the giants. Through them, the line of the frost giants was preserved, harboring a deep, generational memory of the day the gods spilled the blood of their sire. With Ymir gone and the floodwaters slowly settling into a vast, quiet sea, the three brothers stood in the center of the newly cleared space. The old void was gone, replaced by the raw material of a universe waiting to be born. Odin, Vili, and Ve did not rest. They looked upon the massive corpse of the giant and began the monumental task of cosmic craftsmanship, turning the substance of chaos into the structure of reality. They took Ymir's flesh and laid it out across the center of Ginnungagap, flattening it and shaping it into the earth. This land was vast and circular, floating upon the dark waters that had come from his veins. The blood that had once threatened to drown the cosmos was gathered and guided by the gods, poured into the great depressions of the earth to form the vast, deep oceans, the winding rivers, and the still, silent lakes. The salt and the venom of the old rivers became the salt of the sea, creating a barrier that wrapped around the edges of the world. Next, the brothers took Ymir's bones, which were as dense and ancient as the primordial ice, and broke them into pieces. They scattered these fragments across the landscape, raising them high to form the rugged mountain ranges, the towering cliffs, and the stony crags that broke the horizon. His teeth and the shards of his broken bones were ground down to become the pebbles, the gravel, and the stones that lined the valleys and the shores of the new seas. Every boulder and every mountain peak that stands today was once a piece of the first giant skeleton, holding up the weight of the land. Odin, Vili, and Ve then looked up at the vast emptiness above the earth. They took Ymir's skull, lifting it with their divine strength, and arched it high over the land to form the dome of the sky. To hold this massive, heavy vault in place, the brothers placed four incredibly strong dwarfs at the four corners of the world. These dwarfs were named Nordri, Sudri, Austri, and Vestri, north, south, east, and west. They stood at the edges of the horizon, their backs bent under the weight, holding the sky steady so that it would never fall upon the earth below. Even with the skull forming the heavens, the sky was dark and gloomy, filled with drifting, gray vapors. The brothers took Ymir's brains and flung them into the air, scattering them across the vault to form the heavy, soft clouds that drift lazily across the sky, bringing rain and snow to the earth. Yet, the world was still locked in a twilight, illuminated only by the faint, distant glow of the realms of fire and ice. To bring light to their creation, the gods looked toward the south, to the burning realm of Muspelheim. The universe was now an ordered tapestry, a vast and structured expanse where the shining halls of Asgard stood high in the heavens and the green fields of Midgard stretched out below, surrounded by the deep, encircling oceans. The stars moved in their appointed tracks across the dark vault of Ymir's skull, and the clouds drifted lazily on the cosmic winds. Yet, for all its structural beauty, for all its grand mountains and whispering forests, the world was strangely quiet. It was a magnificent theater without an audience, a beautiful house with no one to inhabit its rooms. The gods walked through the valleys and along the pristine shores, but their footsteps were the only sounds that broke the heavy, natural silence of the earth. There was a lack of warmth, a missing spark of fragile life that could appreciate the light of the sun and the mystery of the night. The cosmos was complete, but it was empty. It was during these early, quiet days that Odin, along with his brother gods, walked down from the celestial heights of Asgard. They crossed the shimmering, radiant path of the Bifrost Bridge and stepped onto the physical shores of Midgard. The air was cool and filled with the scent of salt water and damp earth. As they strolled along the edge of the great ocean, where the dark waves gently lapped against the gray sands, their eyes fell upon two pieces of wood that had been cast up by the tide. They were two logs, drifting aimlessly in the surf, battered by the waves and bleached by the sun, lying side by side on the lonely beach. The gods stopped and stood over these pieces of driftwood, looking down at them with a sudden, profound contemplation. One log belonged to an ash tree, strong and straight-grained, stubborn against the elements. The other belonged to an elm tree, softer, graceful, with a supple and yielding nature. In their current form, they were nothing more than debris, helpless pieces of the natural world carried blindly by the currents of the sea, completely at the mercy of the vast, unfeeling cosmos. They had no thoughts, no feelings, no voice, and no destination. They were entirely passive, a reflection of the physical matter of the world, inanimate and cold. Yet, as Odin looked down at the ash and the elm, his deep, all-seeing eye perceived something hidden within the grain of the wood. He saw a reflection of the cosmos itself, a potential for consciousness, a capacity to feel joy, sorrow, love, and fear. The gods did not see these logs as mere refuse, they saw them as vessels waiting to be filled. They realized that here, in the simplest materials of the earth, lay the opportunity to create a new kind of being. It would not be an elemental giant of ice and fire, nor a powerful spirit of light and law like the gods themselves. It would be something entirely new, a creature of the earth, fragile and fleeting, yet possessing a spark of the divine. The creation of humanity was not an accident, but a deliberate act of profound artistic grace and cosmic empathy. The three gods knelt in the sand beside the drifting wood, their long cloaks pooling around them, and began to transform the ash and the elm into the first man and the first woman. Odin, as the All-Father, the source of the ultimate spark, stepped forward first. He leaned down over the inanimate wood and breathed into it. This was not a mere gust of wind, it was the Ond, the sacred breath of life, the vital spirit that separates the living from the dead. As Odin's breath infused the timber, a miraculous transformation began to ripple through the grain. The cold, hardwood began to soften, warming with an internal heat that did not burn. The dry fibers turned to flesh, the dense core became bone, and the sap running through the knots transformed into warm, red blood rushing through newly formed veins. The ash log took the form of a man, and the elm log took the form of a woman. They were no longer objects, they were living, breathing bodies, their chests rising and falling with the rhythm of the tide. Yet, though they breathed, they were still silent, their eyes closed, unaware of who or where they were. Then, the second god stepped forward to bestow his gifts. In the ancient tellings, this god is often spoken of as Honir, or Vili, the bringer of will and mind. He touched the brow of the man and the woman, and into their newly formed brains, he poured the gift of consciousness. He gave them Od, the mind, the intellect, and the capacity for deep emotion. Suddenly, within the darkness of their skulls, the first thoughts began to spark like embers. They received the ability to think, to reason, to wonder, and to choose. Along with the mind came the heavy, beautiful burden of human emotion. They were given the capacity to feel love for one another, to feel joy at the sight of the morning sun, and to feel the quiet, creeping sorrow that comes with the knowledge of time. Their hearts, which had just begun to beat, filled with desire, curiosity, and the restless urge to understand their surroundings. Finally, the third god, often named Loder, or V, moved close to the awakening figures. He gave them the gifts of the senses and physical form. He touched their faces, opening their eyes so they could see the brilliant colors of the rainbow bridge and the deep blue of the sea. He touched their ears, allowing them to hear the rhythmic crashing of the waves and the rustling of the wind through the distant pines. The physical matter of creation had been shaped, and the first breaths of divine and mortal life had been drawn, but the cosmos still required a spine. It needed a grand, living architecture to bind the scattered pieces of reality together, to hold the heavens above the earth, and to connect the deepest abysses of the dead with the highest halls of the living. To fulfill this ultimate cosmic need, there arose a structure of unimaginable scale and organic majesty. This was Yggdrasil, the great world tree. Yggdrasil is an immense, eternal ash tree, whose branches stretch far out over the heavens and whose roots plunge deep into the hidden corners of the universe. It is not merely a tree growing within the world, it is the framework of the world itself. Its smooth, pale bark gleams with a soft, bioluminescent light, and its dense canopy of evergreen leaves cradles the stars, catching the cosmic dust as it drifts through the void. Yggdrasil is the living heart of Norse mythology, a silent, pulsing monument to cosmic balance. Every leaf, every twig, and every knot in its ancient wood holds a piece of existence in place, ensuring that the elements of fire, ice, rock, and spirit remain woven into a single, harmonious design. The great tree is sustained by three massive roots that delve into three different, primordial regions of the cosmos. Each root taps into a profound source of ancient power, anchoring the tree against the chaotic winds of the void. The first root extends down into Nibelheim, the ancient realm of freezing mists and darkness that existed before time began. Here, the root drinks from Freyja, the bubbling cauldron spring from which all the world's cold rivers flow. The second root reaches into Jotunheim, the rugged and treacherous land of the frost giants. This root is nourished by Mimir's well, a deep, silent pool that holds the waters of cosmic wisdom and absolute understanding. To drink from this well is to see through the fabric of time, a prize so great that even Odin would one day pay the price of an eye just to taste its water. The third root stretches high into the heavens, toward the sacred realm of the gods, where it is tended by the well of Urd, a pool of pure, glass-like water that reflects the unalterable truths of existence. The 9 realms embedded in the branches. Woven through the immense structure of Yggdrasil are the 9 realms, distinct worlds that coexist within the tree's vast geometry, representing the different states of being, power, and nature. High in the topmost branches, bathed in eternal light and pristine air, sits Asgard, the majestic fortress of the Asir gods. It is a realm of gleaming golden halls, soaring silver towers, and sprawling courtyards where divine laws are spoken and the order of the universe is maintained. Near Asgard lies Vanaheim, the home of the Vanir, an older lineage of gods associated with nature, fertility, magic, and the deep wisdom of the earth and sea. Vanaheim is a place of lush, whispering forests, wild rivers, and untamed natural beauty, existing in a peaceful, sisterly balance with the ordered architecture of Asgard. Also situated in the higher levels of the world tree is Alfheim, the radiant home of the light elves. Alfheim is a land of ethereal beauty, illuminated by a soft, pale glow that seems to emanate from the very air itself. Its inhabitants are beings of pure light and grace, who tend to the delicate blossoms of the cosmic tree and weave the subtle energies of joy and inspiration through its leaves. Suspended in the perfect center of Yggdrasil, halfway between the celestial heights and the underworld depths, is Midgard, the middle enclosure. This is the realm of humanity, the world crafted from Ymir's flesh and protected by his eyelashes. Midgard is a place of shifting seasons, of rolling green hills, crashing blue oceans, and quiet human villages. It is the earthly stage where mortal lives unfold, beautiful in its fragility, balanced between the divine light above and the creeping shadows below. Bordering Midgard, across wild mountains and freezing seas, lies Jotunheim, the chaotic and formidable home of the Jotnar, the frost and rock giants. Jotunheim is a realm of colossal proportions, filled with jagged, ice-capped peaks, barren stone wastes, and dark, howling wildernesses. It represents the unbridled, destructive power of nature that constantly threatens to encroach upon the ordered peace of Midgard and Asgard. Deep within the subterranean spaces beneath the earth lies Svartalfheim, also known as Nidavellir, the subterranean realm of the dwarfs. Svartalfheim is a labyrinth of winding tunnels, massive underground caverns, and glowing forges built into the roots of mountains. Here, the dwarfs work in the dark, shaping the raw metals and gems of the earth into objects of incredible magic and power. They are the master craftsmen of the cosmos, turning the dead stone into living art. At the stark, elemental extremes of the tree are the two realms that gave birth to existence. To the far south is Muspelheim, the roaring world of elemental fire, liquid rock, and blinding heat, where the giant Surt stands guard with his flaming blade. To the far north is Nibelheim, the desolate waste of ice, glaciers, and eternal fog, a frozen wilderness where the cold never lifts. Finally, deep beneath the third root of Yggdrasil, in the lowest, darkest recesses of the cosmos, lies Helheim, or Hell, the silent realm of the dead. The grand architecture of the world tree stood secure, and the green valleys of Midgard flourished under the watchful eyes of the gods, yet a profound shadow of unease hung over the mind of Odin. He sat upon his high throne of Hlidskjalf in the topmost towers of Asgard, looking out across the vast expanses of the 9 realms. He saw the light elves dancing in the pale air of Alfheim, the dwarfs hammering glowing metal in the deep caverns of Svartalfheim, and the descendants of the ash and the elm building their brief, fragile lives on the earthly shores below. But beneath this surface of structured peace, Odin felt the quiet, relentless creeping of time. He heard the distant, muffled gnawing of the dragon Nidhogg at the roots of the universe, and he recognized that the order he and his brothers had carved from Ymir's flesh was not permanent. The universe was locked in a beautiful but fragile balance, and chaos was always waiting at the gates. Odin understood that raw strength and sharp weapons would not be enough to preserve the cosmos when the final winter arrived. To protect his creations and guide the worlds through the dark paths of destiny, he needed something far more potent than force. He needed absolute, cosmic wisdom. He needed to understand the hidden laws that governed life and death, the secret magic woven into the fabric of reality, and the ultimate designs of the fates. This realization turned into a relentless, burning hunger within his spirit. He became a god possessed by a sacred obsession, willing to endure any hardship, walk any lonely road, and pay any price to open the eyes of his mind to the deep secrets of the universe. This quest for understanding led him down from the golden halls of Asgard, away from the companionship of the other gods, and into the dark, silent wilderness of Jotunheim. He traveled to the deep cavern where the root of the world tree drinks from Mimir's well. This pool was a place of profound stillness, its water dark as night, holding the concentrated memory, wisdom, and history of the cosmos. Sitting beside the dark water was Mimir, an ancient being whose mind was as vast as the void itself. Mimir was the guardian of the well, and he knew everything that had ever transpired from the very first drop of thawing rime in Ginnungagap. Odin approached the old guardian through the mists, his grey cloak wrapped tight, his heart fixed on a single purpose. He looked down into the mirror-like surface of the water and asked Mimir for permission to take a single draught from the well, to taste the pure, unadulterated wisdom hidden in its depths. Mimir looked at the young god with eyes that had watched the birth of Ymir. He knew that the waters of wisdom were not given away lightly, nor could they be bought with gold, promises, or divine status. True understanding requires a real, permanent sacrifice. It demands that a piece of the self be surrendered so that something greater can take its place. Mimir looked into Odin's face and demanded a price that would stagger any lesser being. To drink from the well of wisdom, Odin had to tear out his own right eye and drop it into the dark waters of the pool. The All-Father did not hesitate. The pain of the physical sacrifice was immense, a searing agony that echoed through his divine frame, but his desire for knowledge was absolute. He plunged his fingers into his socket, removed his eye, and let it fall into the black waters of Mimir's well. The eye sank slowly through the depths, settling on the bottom of the pool, where it remained wide open, staring forever through the dark waters, reflecting everything that occurred in the deep roots of the world. In return for this sacrifice, Mimir dipped a great horn into the well, filled it to the brim with the dark water, and handed it to the bleeding god. Odin drank deeply. As the cold water passed his lips, a great wave of clarity rushed through his consciousness. The veil of the unknown was torn away. He saw the vast, interlocking patterns of time, he understood the memories of the past and the designs of the present, and he saw the deep, bittersweet currents of fate that ran through every living thing. He walked away from the cavern with only one eye, but his vision was infinitely greater than it had ever been before. He had traded his physical sight for a cosmic, spiritual sight that could pierce through any shadow. Yet, even the wisdom of Mimir's well was not enough to satisfy the deep, mystical hunger of Odin's soul. There remained another form of knowledge, a hidden, magical language written into the dark fabric of the universe itself. These were the runes, the sacred symbols of power and fate that the Norns used to write the destinies of men and gods. The runes did not exist in a book or a spoken word, they were woven into the very roots of Yggdrasil, concealed in the deepest abyss of non-existence, accessible only to someone who was willing to pass through the gateway of death itself. To unlock this ultimate mystery, Odin undertook a sacrifice that was even more terrifying and profound than the loss of his eye. He traveled to the central trunk of Yggdrasil, the great world tree. He took his legendary spear, Gungnir, and with his own hands, he drove the sharp point deep into his side, pinning his body to the ancient wood of the ash tree. He forbade the other gods from helping him, ordering them to stay far away and to offer him neither food nor water, neither comfort nor prayer. The deep, melancholic wisdom of Odin provided the universe with its spiritual frame, but the physical world of Midgard still required an iron shield. While the All-Father sat on his high throne, staring into the intricate webs of fate and wandering the lonely paths of the cosmos in search of secrets, the green valleys of humanity were constantly threatened by the roaring, chaotic forces of the outer wilderness. From the jagged, frozen peaks of Jotunheim, the frost giants looked upon the ordered peace of the middle enclosure with a bitter, ancient hatred. They wielded the power of avalanches, winter storms, and crushing rocks, always seeking to breach the walls of Midgard and drag creation back into the silent chaos of the old void. To stand against this unrelenting tide, the cosmos produced a protector whose strength was as unyielding as the mountains themselves. This was Thor, the thunder god. Thor's birth was a union of the highest heaven and the deepest earth. He was the son of Odin, the lord of Asgard, and Jord, an ancient giantess whose very name means the earth. In his veins ran the divine fire and intellect of the Aesir, balanced by the raw, massive, elemental power of the soil, the rock, and the bedrock of reality. This heritage made him unique among the gods. Where Odin was distant, mystical, and complex, Thor was grounded, direct, and fiercely loyal to the mortal world. He was born with hair as red as the fires of Muspelheim, eyes that flashed like lightning, and a voice that could shake the leaves of the great world tree Yggdrasil. From the moment he drew his first breath, his destiny was clear. He was to be the champion of order, the guardian of humanity, and the ultimate barrier between the civilized worlds and the wild monsters of the dark. As Thor grew, his physical strength surpassed that of any being in the 9 realms. He was a colossus of vitality, eating entire oxen in a single sitting and drinking vast barrels of mead without faltering. Yet, despite his immense power, his nature was not one of cruelty or tyranny. Thor possessed a remarkably simple, honest, and warm heart. He was a god of the common people, the farmers who tilled the soil of Midgard, the sailors who braved the rough northern seas, and the families who gathered around the hearth fire for warmth. They loved him because he was reliable. When the sky grew dark and the heavy summer rains poured down to nourish the crops, the humans below did not hide in fear. They looked up at the rolling clouds, smiled, and listened to the comforting rumble of his chariot. They knew that the thunder was the sound of their protector watching over them, keeping the dangers of the wilderness at bay. The forging of Mjolnir. Every great champion requires a weapon that matches their spirit, and the story of how Thor received his legendary hammer, Mjolnir, is woven with both clever trickery and cosmic craftsmanship. It began with the mischievous god Loki, who, in a moment of malicious whimsy, sneaked into the bedchamber of Thor's wife, the beautiful goddess Sif, and sheared away her magnificent, glowing golden hair. Sif's hair was a symbol of the ripening wheat fields of Midgard, and when Thor discovered the insult, his rage was like a volcanic eruption. He seized Loki, his grip tightening until Loki's bones cracked, threatening to grind him into dust unless he found a way to replace the stolen hair with something even more beautiful. Terrified for his life, Loki journeyed deep into the subterranean darkness of Svartalfheim, where the master craftsmen, the dwarfs, lived and worked among the roots of the mountains. He approached the sons of Ivaldi, who used their dark magic and glowing forges to create a head of hair made of pure, spun gold that would grow from Sif's scalp like natural tresses. Seeking to spark a competition, Loki then went to 2 other dwarven brothers, Brokkr and Sindri, wagering his own head that they could not manufacture 3 treasures as magnificent as those made by the sons of Ivaldi. The brothers accepted the challenge, and Sindri began his work in the intense heat of the underground forge. For their third and ultimate creation, Sindri placed a massive piece of raw iron into the coals. He instructed his brother Brokkr to work the heavy bellows continuously, warning him that if the airflow faltered even for a single second, the treasure would be ruined. Loki, desperate to win the wager and save his own head, transformed himself into a stinging fly. He flew into the forge, landing on Brokkr's eyelid and biting down with deep, venomous malice. Blood poured into the dwarf's eye, blinding him, and in the final moments of the firing, Brock was forced to lift his hand for a brief fraction of a second to wipe away the blood. When Sindri pulled the weapon from the coals, the iron had hardened, but because of the momentary interruption of the bellows, the handle was slightly too short. It was a massive, heavy war hammer with a blocky, indestructible head, but its shaft was short enough that it could only be wielded with a single hand. This was Mjolnir, the Crusher. Despite the short handle, when the treasures were brought to Asgard and presented to the gods, it was universally agreed that Mjolnir was the greatest artifact ever created. It was a weapon of absolute perfection, imbued with a cosmic weight. It was indestructible. No matter how hard it struck a mountain or a giant's skull, the iron would never chip or crack. It was perfectly balanced. The architecture of the cosmos was structured, the shields of iron were forged, and the paths of the stars were set in their unyielding tracks. Yet, an ordered universe can become stagnant without a catalyst, a force that introduces friction, breaks the patterns, and forces the living to adapt, to wakeful attention, and to change. In the grand tapestry of the Norse cosmos, this fluid nature was embodied by a single, elusive figure who walked the halls of Asgard like a shifting shadow. He was not a pillar of stability like Thor, nor a master of absolute destiny like Odin. He was the element of the unpredictable, the flame that dances between light and dark, the quicksilver mind that could build a world or break a heart with a single smile. This was Loki, the trickster god. Loki's origins were rooted in the very chaos that the gods had spent ages trying to tame. He was not of the Aesir lineage by blood, he was the son of Farbodi, an ancient giant whose name means the cruel striker, and Laufey, a mysterious figure often associated with the soft needles of the pine tree or the leaves of the forest. In his ancestry lay the unbridled, dangerous vitality of the Jotnar, the frost and fire giants who lived on the bleak margins of reality. Yet, Loki did not belong to the frozen wastes of Jotunheim. He possessed a beauty, an elegance, and a razor-sharp intellect that set him apart from his craggy, slow-moving kin. He was a creature of the threshold, standing with one foot in the high palaces of the gods and the other in the wild abysses of the monsters, belonging truly to neither, an eternal outsider who walked inside the inner circles of power. The mystery of how a child of the giants came to live among the gods is tied to a profound, ancient ritual of brotherhood. In the early days of the world, when Asgard was still young and the walls of Midgard were freshly raised, Odin met Loki in the misty spaces between the realms. The All-Father, with his deep, single-eyed vision, recognized a rare, mercurial brilliance in the young giant. He saw a mind that did not think in straight lines, a perspective that could solve problems that brute force could never touch. Instead of destroying him, Odin chose to bind Loki to his side. The two stood together, cut their skin, and mingled their blood in the dark soil, swearing a sacred oath of blood brotherhood. From that day forward, they were bound by an unbreakable spiritual knot. Odin swore that he would never drink a single horn of mead in any hall unless Loki was also offered a cup beside him. This blood bond granted Loki full passage into the highest councils of the Aesir. He became the companion of kings, the traveling partner of Thor, and the court philosopher of Asgard, a position built not on land or armies, but on the sheer necessity of his brilliant, winding wit. The architecture of the trickster. To understand Loki is to understand the nature of fire itself. Fire is neither inherently good nor inherently evil, it is a transformative force. It can warm a cold house during the bitter winter nights, cooking the food that sustains a family, or it can consume the entire village in a matter of hours if left unchecked. Loki was the psychological manifestation of this duality. He possessed a volatile, liquid identity, capable of shifting his physical form at will. He could become a sleek falcon soaring through the clouds, a silver salmon darting through the rushing mountain streams, a buzzing fly hiding in the corner of a room, or an elderly woman sitting by a village well. Along with his shape, his moral alignment shifted constantly, guided not by a desire for destruction, but by an insatiable curiosity, a love for dramatic irony, and a deep-seated resistance to anything that was permanent or rigid. He was the ultimate catalyst. When the gods grew too complacent in their golden halls, safe behind their high walls, it was always Loki who introduced the element of jeopardy, setting off a chain of events that would test their limits and force them to grow. In many of the earliest myths, Loki acts as the problem solver of Asgard, though he is almost always the one who created the problem in the first place. This cycle of error and redemption defines his early relationship with the Aesir. A prime example is the construction of the massive walls of Asgard. A mysterious blastsmith arrived at the gates of the gods, offering to build an impregnable stone wall around their fortress that would protect them from all giants forever. In exchange, the builder demanded a terrifying price: the sun, the moon, and the beautiful goddess Freyja as his wife. The gods, counseled by Loki, agreed to the terms, believing the task to be impossible within the single winter season specified in the contract. They permitted the smith to use his great horse, Svadilfari, to haul the stones. To the horror of the Aesir, Svadilfari proved to be a creature of miraculous strength, moving massive blocks of granite through the night with effortless ease. As the spring approached, the wall was nearly finished, and the gods faced the prospect of losing the light of the sun and the presence of beauty itself. Faced with the wrath of the gods, who threatened him with death if the bargain was fulfilled, Loki did not use a weapon or a spell. He used psychology and transformation. He changed himself into a beautiful, young mare and emerged from the dark forests just as Svadilfari was pulling the final, essential stones toward the gate. The long, golden age of the cosmos was beginning to cool, and the heavy weight of time pressed down upon the halls of Asgard. The high walls built by the giant masons stood strong, and Thor's hammer continued to sound across the eastern horizons, yet a silent, creeping anxiety invaded the dreams of the All-Father. Odin sat upon his high throne of Hlidskjalf, his single eye piercing the layers of reality, looking down into the deep, misty valleys of the future. He did not like what he saw. The threads of destiny woven by the Norns beside the sacred well were turning dark, fraying at the edges with the unmistakable scent of blood and ash. Prophecies, ancient and unyielding, began to echo through the long corridors of the god's palace. These old whispers spoke of a time when the order they had carved from Ymir's flesh would be tested by monsters born from their own inner circles, creatures of absolute devastation who would rise from the shadows to swallow the sun, crush the earth, and bring the twilight of the gods to its terrible fulfillment. The source of this gathering darkness lay in a secret, forbidden alliance. Loki, the blood brother of Odin, had departed from Asgard for long stretches of time, traveling into the grim, ironwood forests of Jotunheim. There, in the deep shadows where the sun never shone, he lived with Angrboda, an ancient giantess whose name means the bringer of sorrow. She was a creature of primal magic, a personification of the raw, vengeful grief of the giant race. From the union of the quicksilver trickster and the sorrow-bringing giantess, 3 extraordinary children were born. They were not beautiful like the Aesir, nor were they simple rock giants. They were the ultimate anti-cosmic forces, biological paradoxes that held the power to dissolve the architecture of the 9 realms. When the gods learned of these children, a cold dread rippled through Asgard. The prophecies were explicit: these three siblings would be the instruments of the world's undoing. To protect creation, Odin knew he had to act before the children reached their full maturity. He gathered a host of gods, and they marched into the dark heart of the Iron Wood, seizing the three young monsters from the arms of Angrboda and bringing them in heavy chains to the high judgments of Asgard. The dispelling of the first two siblings. The three children stood in the center of the divine courtyard, surrounded by the shining towers of the Aesir. The first child was a daughter named Hel. She was a chilling, melancholic sight to behold. Her body was split down the exact center, from her crown to her feet. One half of her form was that of a beautiful, pale young woman, while the other half was the blue-gray, decaying flesh of a corpse, cold to the touch and smelling of the grave. She spoke in low, hollow whispers, and her eyes held no warmth, only the absolute, indifferent stillness of the end of life. Odin looked upon her and understood that she did not belong in the vibrant world of the living. He did not destroy her; instead, he cast her down into the deepest, lowest recesses of the cosmos, beneath the third root of the world tree, naming her the ruler of Helheim, the vast, silent underworld. She was given authority over all 9 mansions of the dead, destined to receive the souls of those who died of old age, sickness, and accident, dwelling in a perpetual twilight where the noise of the living could never penetrate. The second child was a creature of water and scales. This was Jormungandr, a serpentine hatchling that exuded a thick, black venom capable of dissolving iron. Even in his youth, the serpent grew at an unnatural, terrifying speed, his coiled body lengthening with every breath he took. His eyes gleamed with a cold, ancient malice that mirrored the deep, unplumbed abysses of the primeval sea. Odin recognized that if this creature remained on land, he would soon choke the valleys of Midgard. The All-Father lifted the writhing serpent with his divine strength, walked to the high cliffs that overlooked the outer world, and hurled Jormungandr deep into the vast, dark ocean that encircled the earth. The serpent plunged into the black waves, sinking to the very bottom of the seabed. There, in the cold, crushing dark, he continued to grow until his body wrapped entirely around the circumference of Midgard, biting his own tail, holding the human world in a suffocating, venomous embrace. But it was the third child who struck the deepest terror into the hearts of the gods. This was Fenrir, a wolf pup of colossal proportions and frightening intelligence. The growing shadow of the wolf. Unlike his siblings, Fenrir was kept within the walls of Asgard. When he was young, he appeared as a magnificent, oversized wolf cub, his fur as dark as a starless night, his teeth like rows of small ivory knives. The gods, fascinated by his majesty and hoping they could tame his wild nature through proximity to divine order, allowed him to wander the lawns and courtyards of their palace. But as the months blended into years, the illusion of taming vanished. Fenrir grew at a rate that defied the laws of nature. He became a mountain of muscle, bone, and gray fur. When he walked, the stones cracked beneath his massive paws; when he growled, the low, guttural vibration shook the glass windows of Valhalla. His eyes burned with a restless, hungry fire, a hunger that was not merely for meat, but for the destruction of everything that was small, ordered, and safe. The long, fragile suspension of the cosmos had finally reached its limit. For age upon age, the white clay of the Norns had healed the splitting bark of Yggdrasil, and the iron hammer of Thor had kept the frontiers secure, but the threads of destiny were woven with an unalterable geometry. In the Norse universe, time is not an endless, straight line; it is a great wheel that must eventually complete its circle, returning everything to the silent chaos from which it was born. The gods had built their magnificent civilization upon sacrifices, deceptions, and the binding of monsters, but every debt in the cosmos must eventually be paid. The twilight that Odin had glimpsed from his high throne was no longer a distant whisper in the mist. It was arriving. The onset of the end did not begin with the roar of an army, but with a profound, terrifying shift in the natural world. This was the arrival of the Fimbulwinter, the great winter of winters. It was a season that broke the ancient rhythms of the earth. The gentle transition of spring, the warmth of summer, and the gold of autumn simply vanished. Instead, 3 winters followed one another in immediate succession, with no summers in between to thaw the ground. A bitter, driving snow blew from all directions across Midgard. The sun grew pale and cold, its light choked by heavy, gray mists that hung low over the frozen valleys. The oceans hardened into thick sheets of blue ice, and the winds howled through the skeletal trees with a biting, relentless fury that froze the breath in human throats. As the cold deepened and resources withered, the moral fabric of the human world began to fray and dissolve. In the darkness of the Fimbulwinter, survival became the only law. The old alliances, the sacred oaths of hospitality, and the bonds of family were shattered by desperation. Brothers turned their swords against brothers in the dark, fathers abandoned their children, and the valleys of Midgard were consumed by a bleak, lawless warfare. The poet spoke of this time as an age of axes, an age of swords, an age of shields splintered, a wind age, a wolf age, before the world fell headlong into ruin. The internal order of humanity died long before the physical structures of the earth collapsed. The shattering of the cosmic chains. High in the sky, the great celestial chase that had ordered day and night came to a violent end. The 2 primordial wolves, Skoll and Hati, who had pursued the sun and the moon across the heavens since the dawn of creation, finally closed the distance. Skoll leaped upon the sun, his massive jaws opening to swallow her golden chariot, plunging the 9 realms into a sudden, unnatural darkness. Hati seized the moon, tearing it apart in the heights, and the stars fell from the dome of Ymir's skull like burning embers raining down into a dead sea. The earth began to tremble. It was not a passing tremor, but a cataclysmic shudder that shook the bedrock of the universe, tearing the roots of Yggdrasil from their ancient moorings. The mountains toppled, crumbling into massive avalanches of stone and ice. The great crags and boulders that had held the chains of the monsters were split apart. On the lonely island of Lyngvi, the boulder Joel shattered into dust. The silky ribbon of Gleipnir, which had held the giant wolf Fenrir for eons, finally lost its paradoxical magic and snapped. Fenrir stood up, free at last, his joints cracking like thunder, his heart burning with an ancient, concentrated fury. His stature had grown so immense that when he opened his jaws, his lower mandible scraped the bedrock of the earth and his upper jaw pressed against the vault of the heavens. If there had been room, he would have opened them wider. Fire flared from his eyes and nostrils as he bounded across the frozen landscape, breathing destruction upon everything in his path. Deep beneath the ocean waves, the sudden violent movement of the earth shook the Midgard serpent, Jormungandr. Locked in his ancient rage, the serpent unleashed his tail from his mouth and writhed in the depths. He surged upward, his colossal, scaled body churning the seas into a foaming, suffocating deluge that washed over the shores of Midgard. As he broke the surface of the water, he blew a continuous, thick cloud of black venom into the air, poisoning the sea, the sky, and the land, turning the atmosphere into a choking shroud of death. The arrival of the enemy fleets. From the east, across the boiling, venomous seas, a terrifying vessel began its journey. This was Naglfar, the ship of the dead. It was a vessel constructed entirely from the unpared nails of dead men, a slow, monstrous creation of human neglect that had grown across the centuries. It was steered by the giant Hrym, its decks crowded with the pale, silent armies of the frost giants, who marched out from the howling wastes of Jotunheim to seek their ancient vengeance against the gods. At the same time, the gates of the underworld burst open. Loki, the trickster, broke free from the dark cavern where the gods had bound him beneath the venomous serpent. His quicksilver mind was now entirely consumed by a cold, calculating desire to see Asgard fall. He took his place as the captain of a dark fleet, steering a ship that carried all the pale, silent dead of Helheim, along with his monstrous children. He was no longer the companion of Thor or the blood brother of Odin, he was the master of ceremonies for the universe's execution. The vast, boiling deluge that had swallowed the ruins of Vigrid and the charred bones of Asgard eventually grew still. For a long, unmeasured age, there was neither dawn nor dusk, neither the passage of months nor the counting of winters. The universe slept in a state of absolute, dark suspension, wrapped in the cold, liquid embrace of the primeval ocean. The ash of Yggdrasil had settled into the deep trenches of the seabed, the venom of Jormungand had been diluted and washed clean by the infinite waters, and the scorching fires of Surt had burned themselves out, leaving only a profound, silent dark. It was a return to the pristine void of Ginnungagap, a time before the first giants were carved from the frost, before the gods had drawn the boundaries of the land, and before humanity had learned to fear the shadow of the wolf. Yet, in the systemic philosophy of the Norse cosmos, death is never a permanent destination. It is the necessary winter that precedes an unyielding spring, it is the fallow period wherein the soil gathers its strength to dream of new growth. The destruction of the old world was not a cosmic mistake or a failure of the divine plan, it was a cleansing, a deliberate clearing of a canvas that had become too heavy with the accumulation of broken oaths, hidden crimes, and old, festering hatreds. The old world had to dissolve completely so that its architecture could be rebuilt without the foundational flaws of deceit and violence. As the silent centuries accumulated in the deep, a subtle, rhythmic pulse began to stir within the womb of the dark waters. It was the first sign that the cycle was turning once again. The heavy, gray mists that had choked the sky since the Fimbulwinter began to thin, parting like old curtains to reveal a clean, open vault above. The water ceased its turbulent churning and became as smooth and reflective as a sheets of black glass, waiting in absolute stillness for the arrival of the new dawn. The rising of the new earth. Then, with a slow, majestic grace that defied the memory of the cataclysm, the earth began to rise once more from the sea. It did not emerge as a jagged, broken ruin of rock and ash, but as a pristine, radiant landscape. The new land was green, fertile, and extraordinarily beautiful, its valleys and plains freshly washed by the deep ocean. Mountain peaks climbed into the morning air, their crags glistening with clear, sweet water that cascaded down in sparkling waterfalls to feed the lowlands below. As the land stabilized, the meadows immediately burst into life without the need for human hands or plowshares. Fields of wild grain, heavy with gold, rippled in the gentle breeze, growing from seeds that had slept securely beneath the soil during the fire. Vines of sweet berries and clusters of bright wild flowers carpeted the hillsides, filling the morning air with a clean, sweet fragrance that wiped away the lingering smell of sulfur and ash. The rivers ran clear and cold, their waters free from poison, jumping over smooth stones as they wound their way toward the sea. High above the green fields, a new light appeared in the heavens. Before the old sun had been swallowed by the wolf skull, she had given birth to a daughter, a maiden son more beautiful, more radiant, and more pure than her mother. This new sun climbed into the clean blue sky, her golden rays bathing the virgin earth in a warm, gentle light that carried no harshness or scorching heat. She followed an unhurried, peaceful track across the sky, untroubled by the shadow of any wolf, establishing a new, unbroken rhythm of day and night that promised safety to everything that breathed below. The return of the surviving gods. On the high, green plateau where the palace of Asgard had once lifted its golden towers, a small group of figures gathered in the morning light. These were the survivors, the younger generation of the gods who had outlived the cataclysm, preserved by fate to carry the memory of the past into the promise of the future. They walked through the lush grass of Yggdrasil, the ancient assembly plain, their footsteps silent on the dew-drenched earth. Among them stood Vidar and Vali, the sons of Odin. They had survived both the fury of the wolf and the elemental fires of Surt, their strength intact, their minds clear and calm. Beside them walked Modi and Magni, the sons of Thor. They had inherited their father's immense vitality, and between them, they carried Mjolnir, the great iron hammer. But they did not lift it to wage war or to crush giants, they carried it as a tool of consecration, a symbol of protection and order that would be used to stabilize the borders of the new world. As they stood together, speaking in low, respectful voices about the great battles and the fallen heroes of the past, two more figures emerged from the misty borders of the underworld. These were Baldr, the radiant god of peace and light, and his brother Hödr, the blind god who had been the unwitting instrument of his death. Their presence in the upper world was the ultimate sign that the old tragedies had lost their power. Helheim had opened its gates and released them, its ancient claim on their souls dissolved by the destruction of the old order. Baldr and Hödr walked side by side, their old grievances forgotten, their hands joined in a bond of perfect fraternity. The surviving gods sat down together in the warm grass of Yggdrasil. As they ran their fingers through the soil, they discovered something gleaming in the roots of the clover.